Hello. Welcome back to Life Chats with Friends. This is your host, Antonio Stevens, and I'm excited to be here with you today, joined by Gareth Whalley. For many of us, depending on where you're based in the world, I imagine that you are transitioning seasons. So for us here in the Americas, Europe as well, we are exiting summer and entering autumn. Winter could be for some of us, and I hope that you are all leveraging this time for deep self-reflection as you transition into this new phase of life. I'm excited to have Gareth here today to talk to us and to venture a little bit around turning setbacks into opportunities. Before we get into that, though, Gareth describes himself as a human being with passions for language and beautiful design, and a personal purpose to make work life better for as many people as he can. He's based in the northeast of England, where he lives on a remote hillside, which is super beautiful. I've seen photos with his two dogs, Heidi and Ludo, and runs an Airbnb on the side. In the world of work, Gareth is the founder, CEO, and chief connection officer of Big Bang People Solutions. Big Bang is an HR consultancy that helps organizations help their people have a better time at work, primarily through diversity, equity, and inclusion, reward and recognition, and change management and communications. He's principled and values-driven, a strong connector and relationship builder, a safe space, a well-being advocate, proudly queer, and determined to help people not take everything so seriously. Gareth, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, my friend. I'm doing really well, thank you. I'm just recovering from the jet lag from a 2-week trip in Asia, but other than that, all good, all good. And it's really nice to be here with you, Antonio.
Thank you so much. And a question that I love to ask all my guests before we get into this, if you would be able to share with us some of the lived experiences that have shaped your worldviews.
Oh, okay. So I was born into what you could say is quite a lot of privilege, to be honest. So I was born, obviously I'm sitting here as a man in white skin, you know, in a body with which I've always identified, not yet disabled. But alongside that, there's also been some struggle and some experience of otherness. So I was born into a working class family, you know, not a lot of money flying around when I was a kid, but thankfully a lot of love to go around. I realized that I was gay at the age of about 10, but that was at a time, so kind of late 1980s, UK, not a lot of queer role models on the TV and in the movies. It was always sad stories or desperate stories. It was right at the, start of the AIDS crisis, so all of the horrible political rhetoric around that and around the gay community. And just, not really accepting that for myself. So I think the experience of being a queer kid in a hostile world intersecting with, growing up in a working class environment, I think those two things have been fairly fundamental to my kind of growth as a human and my experiences. It took me a long time to come out. I didn't come out till I was 26. So I lived with that kind of, shame and fear for a really long time. I would say those things also gave me a drive. They gave me, as well as having very encouraging parents who always told me that I could be, the best and be what I wanted to be. So I think having that sense of needing to overcome things kind of thrusted me into work pretty hard. I really threw myself into work and developed a really strong work ethic quite young. I was always one of those kind of perfect kids at school, really good academically. I was a really strong swimmer. So there was a lot of expectation, I suppose, which I kind of jumped on the back of. And like many queer people, took the what's the right word? I took the disadvantage maybe that represents as an opportunity to try and achieve more. And so I think those are the things that have shaped my worldview most. I would say also, I was very fortunate that I picked up languages really quickly as a kid. So I learned German first, then French, then Spanish, then I learned Italian earlier in my career, and I had the opportunity to live in lots of different countries quite earlier in my career. So whilst I'm very British in many, many ways, I'm also possibly surprisingly quite, kind of multicultural, and I've experienced living in different places and having, the opportunity to see things through different lenses and not just through a single kind of cultural view. And I think that really set me up for success in business, actually, because I've always used my languages in my work, but also I've, developed a real kind of cultural sensitivity and, knowledge of world cultures, I suppose. And I think that's quite a big part of who I am professionally as well as personally.
That's amazing. And this is the first time I'm kind of hearing a little bit more about your backstory outside of what you've shared in the time that we worked together. But just to pause to say, I'm proud of you in where you're coming from and what I've seen in the years and the impact that you've made and how you approach your work and operate, like really coming from a loving place and a place of like, I want to leave this world a better place than I found it, or making this a better experience for other people that are like me. I really see that like truly in what you've done in the short span that we did work together.
Thank you. Appreciate you saying that. And I think, I pride myself on the skill of empathy. I think that's one of the things that I have quite naturally, but I've also really worked on. And I think especially coming into work in diversity, equity and inclusion over the last 5 years, the passion that I always had for helping other people have a better time, like overcoming challenges and seeing things in different ways. And, coming into the work in DE, and I really shifted that from a passion to a purpose, And so that's why the business that I've set up recently, it's all about that. It's all about reframing. It's all about understanding, connecting, really importantly, connecting deeply. And developing that skill of radical empathy and helping other people to do that.
Fantastic. And you briefly touched on your business, and that's a really good segue into what we're here to talk about today. But are there any stories or, any recent experiences that you've had where you had a setback that you've turned into an opportunity for growth and success, either personally or professionally, with your business or other experiences?
Yeah, so let's start with the business. That's the obvious one, right? So the story here was, so I came to my most recent employer from another company that I'd been with for 8 years and had a really wonderful career experience there. And the reasons for me moving to the new place were I really bought into the culture and the values of the organisation. I really liked the role as it was set up. It was a brand new role, and so there was lots of latitude and kind of whiteboarding for me to, figure out what it needed to be and how to do it. And there was a huge appetite for the work in the organisation. And so I had a wonderful time. I came to that company raring to go, and I feel like I made an impact really quickly. And actually I planned to stay there. I really did. But of course the universe had, a different plan. The organisation went into a big, global transformation from a business perspective, which also meant some fairly brutal restructuring needed to happen. And unfortunately my role was one of many that was, impacted and eliminated as part of that change. And of course that was not my plan. I thought, I was going to be there for at least another 2 or 3 years. Hadn't made any plan B, really. Although having said that, I had come to that role with a very clear point of view that was my last corporate gig. I was kind of ready to move into a new stage of life work-wise, which would be much more of a kind of like a balanced portfolio of stuff, things that would enable me to fulfill my purpose and align the work that I was doing with my values, but helping people in a lot more different contexts rather than just in one organisation. But of course, that plan wasn't meant to happen yet. And so the setback was, of course, this sudden news that, oh my God, you're not going to have a job in the next 2 months. And the thought process there was, are you ready yet to pull the trigger on that new chapter? Because, I hadn't started working on the infrastructure to make that happen. And I wasn't sure that I had the confidence, quite honestly, at that point to do it. And of course, the news came in about the job elimination. I was like, oh, I've got to find another job. And, you start trolling LinkedIn, and I even put in one application. And then I was like, hang on a minute, put the brakes on here. Listen to your gut and remember what your long-term plan always was. And think about, well, actually, if not now, when? And why not now? Actually, because 20 plus years of experience in the corporate world in all of these different areas, a really good sense of the kind of work that I enjoy doing, the kind of organizations that I align with, the kind of people that I like working with. Have confidence in that, have belief and trust that actually all of that will stand you in good stead. And so very quickly, I came through that change curve that we always talk about really quickly. And just had a word with myself basically and said, just do it, And
what is the change curve?
The change curve is something that we talk about often in business, but it can also be applied to any situation really where an unexpected change happens. And it's all about the way that the human kind of emotions develop during the course of that change. So it starts with, curiosity and interest, but quite quickly goes downhill, and that's why the curve comes in, right? So the emotions go downhill, you get into anger, you get into denial, you get into resentment, and then eventually, as time passes and as you process your own emotions, you start to come back up the hill and you start to get into excitement, right? And maybe a sense of possibility and future and all of that stuff. So it's kind of like a trough, essentially, but you come out the other side of it. So in this context, I think I skipped a few stages, honestly. I never experienced the resentment or the anger. I've certainly had a bit of the denial, but came through that quite quickly into the more positive emotions. And I think that's because deep down, I kind of knew what I wanted to do next. I just didn't know that I was ready for it. But as soon as I did, it became really clear to me, I knew the kind of work that I wanted to do. I knew the kind of organizations that I wanted to work with. I also knew that setting up a consultancy was just part of the story, and I never wanted that to be a full-time job. And so I had this real sense of excitement about all of these possibilities of what else could be, right? So yes, there's work that I will do as a job, which in this case is consulting with clients in exactly the areas of work that I love and that I feel like I can make an impact in. But also knowing that outside of that, I could also create the space for volunteering. I recently joined a board of a charity, and I could put much more of my time into that. And just, achieving more balance. And so that felt really exciting to me as well, just the opportunity, there was never going to be a 9 to 5 again. And so I think that really helped with the process of getting through that curve, because I saw a possibility, because I kind of already knew in the back of my mind what I wanted it to look like. It's not to say that I didn't have trepidation, or that I didn't have imposter syndrome and all of those things that you have, right, when you're going into a new venture. And honestly, I still do, right? I mean, we're at May, June, July. We're 3 or 4 months into this journey, so it's still really new. And so I still do feel some of those, the fears of, will I get enough clients? Will it generate enough income to pay the bills? All of that stuff. But actually, staying true to that belief and that excitement that this could be something very different and something that is more fulfilling than anything I've ever done before, I think that was at the heart of it.
I've been speaking to a good amount of people now that have gone through similar experiences, or they're in an experience where they're like, is this for me? I'm not really sure. Like they know they want something else, but are not quite sure how to get to that space of quietness to be like, yep, this is it. This is the thing that I want to go after. So question for you is like, how do you get into that mindset of like adopting a new perspective and letting that new perspective aid you in navigating whatever that redirection is that the universe and life is trying to show you, or the redirection that the universe is trying to, put you on that track to say, actually, this is where you're supposed to be. Like everything is happening for a reason, and it's happening for you and not to you.
Yeah. So 2 important things there. One, and I should say this because I had the immense privilege and fortune to walk away from that organisation with a chunk of money. And that chunk of money equates to a cushion of time, right? So the pressure to like run immediately into like earning the same amount of money that I was earning before wasn't there. So I want to acknowledge that privilege, because I think that really helped with a sense of calm and a sense of perspective and, an element of relaxation around the situation. But you hit the nail on the head with something you just said then, which is what's happening for you versus what's happening to you, or, however you said it. I think the way I've approached this one is very similar to the way I've approached other changes in my life. And I learned this probably, let's say 5 or 6 years ago. It can be very easy to fall into the trap of anxiety where you feel like everything is happening to you and you have absolutely no control and there's no worse feeling in the world. But actually, whether it's in small ways or big ways, there are always elements of an experience where you can find agency, where you can take control of even parts of the experience that helps you kind of stay grounded in, like, this isn't all just happening to me and around me, but actually there are things here that and some of the things that you can always take control of is how you take care of your own well-being, and how you, whatever tactics you choose to use, right? So I tried for many years to develop a successful meditation practice, and honestly, I failed. I did find the practice helpful when it was working for me, but just keeping that consistent was really difficult. But there were other things that I found that would enable me to sort of stay grounded, make sure that I was thinking things through properly. One of them being journaling, which is kind of my proxy for meditation, honestly. Like just starting the day, and thank you to Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, for introducing me to the morning pages, which is now what I call journaling, right? You wake up in the morning and before you do anything else, you just let your brain empty out onto the page. And you write and you write and you write until you've got nothing else to write. And it's about how you're feeling, what you've got to do, the things that you did yesterday that were successful or weren't so successful, whatever it might be in it. And in The Artist's Way, that's all about unblocking creativity for an artist, right? But I think it works in any context. You can use it as a means of clearing your mind in the same way that a meditation practice would do. And in particular, what I would do is use journaling as a means of checking in on my sources of distress. So I'm very clear that I've got, 4 or 5 consistent sources of potential distress in my life. So use the journaling practice to say, right, well, where am I with this relationship, which can be problematic? Where am I with work? Where am I with my general life admin to-do list, etc., etc. And so that was a daily practice of kind of reminding yourself that actually things are okay. Yeah, maybe one of these things is spiking a little bit, but actually on the whole, like, there's balance here. So that's one. I think the other one is...
I think that's a really powerful way too to look at your life, like recognizing that it won't always be like, everything is firing on all cylinders and everything's great. Like, right. That is the natural flow of life. Like, there will be certain areas where, may not be going so well, but it's being able to step out and having that perspective to say, actually, like, my family's great. I have a healthy relationship here. Like, work isn't just my life, or my family is not just my life. Like, there are all these other things that make you a whole human being.
100%. And related to that, when you check in on those potential sources of distress and you realise that one is spiking and everything else is on an even keel, well, you know where you need to focus your attention, right? And again, thinking about that concept of control and taking control, even if that thing that is spiking feels completely outside of your control, well, then focus your control on maintaining an even keel with the other things. So there's always that sense of agency. The other thing that's been really important to me is about 5 years ago now, I found a really incredible therapist. And he has been such an important person in my life for these last few years because, you know, whether it's been in really heightened periods where I've needed to see him once a week to really keep things, you know, under control, or like it is at the moment where it's very ad hoc and I can just call him and say, hey, can we have a session next week? I've got a few things I want to explore with you. Just having that knowledge that there's a neutral person there who is not involved in any of these peaks and troughs of whatever else is going on in your life, but can give you a very neutral perspective and can help you reframe some of the ways that you're thinking about these things, whether it be work, family, romantic relationships, you know, processing childhood trauma, like whatever it might be, right? Just knowing that you've got that resource available is also incredibly comforting, and also something that you can pull on when some of those, you know, those spikes get a little bit too spiky.
I think therapy is amazing. I think, well, I still understand access is an issue for a lot of people, but there's so many resources that are out there. And to your point and what you shared earlier, I think as we are all moving through change, and I imagine all of us are kind of in this place right now, just looking at what's happening globally and all these different uncertainties, I do think, you know, focusing on your well-being is a good starting point. But outside of what you've shared already, are there any additional strategies? So for, you know, someone listening to this right now that's like, okay, what does this look like in a really tangible way for me? Like, if I were to sit down and say, all right, this thing has happened for me, not to me, like, what is step 1? What is step 2, 3, 4 to get that individual to that place where they're like, okay, I'm not hopeless. I'm not falling into despair. Like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel to see me through to whatever this next phase of that individual's life is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's a blueprint. Or if there is, I don't think I've found it, right? But I think there's a few things I would say. So one is, be really clear on what you want and what you need. You might not be in control of achieving all of those things, but actually if you have them listed and they're you know, present in your mind, that can actually be really helpful. Because it's easy in these situations when you feel out of control and where you feel like things are happening to you to let go of your wants and needs, because, well, who am I to have demands in this situation when it's all just gone to shit, right? So I think that's one. I think 2 is squeeze the juice out of your network. You know, so whether that's friends and family, whether it's your professional network, whether it's people that you've worked with or for in the past who know you well in that context and can give you, whether it's affirmation or reassurance or actually concrete advice, you know, use the people around you, and don't be afraid to reach out to people that maybe you've not been in touch with for a while, but you know that, you know, they have a strong sort of sense of who you are and what you're capable of and all of that stuff. I think lean on people is important. I think recognizing that there's always time. You know, sometimes it feels like these things are moving so quickly, and especially if a lot of it's out of your control, it can be like blah 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 blah. But actually, if you can just pause, you know, and if you can look at the situation, you know, maybe take an objective view of the situation, you know, kind of project yourself out of it, look at yourself from the outside and look at all of the situation. And again, that journaling practice helps with this. It can give you a sense of, sometimes I'll write like 3 paragraphs about something that's going on and I'm like, this is unsolvable, oh my God. And then actually I've got to the end of paragraph 3, I'm like, it's not actually a big deal. Like, there's a really obvious solution to this. I just needed the time and the space to think it through. It's like that. I don't know if you have this, Antonio. It's resonated with a few people that I've said this to before. You go to bed at night and there's something on your mind and you lie awake and you think about it and you ruminate and you can't see any possible positive outcome to it. And eventually you fall asleep and you wake up in the morning and you're like, duh, it's really obvious what I need to do.
There's the answer.
So just sometimes it's time and objectivity, I think, as well, and not letting yourself be so caught up in it, as stressful as it might be and as overwhelming as it might feel. There's usually something to be gained from just stepping back, having a pause and taking some objective perspective.
Do you think this is like life's redirections or changes are the gateway for self-discovery, for growth, for finding new passions, or leaning into something that you wouldn't expect to be leaning into at a specific point in time in your life? Like really leaning into this business and following your dreams, your passions.
Yeah, I do. I think if you sort of do all of the things that we've just been talking about, you're much more likely to be able to center your wants and needs. And I think that's what this actually comes down to, because focusing on your wants and needs can actually be quite enlightening. And it might be that you discover in that process that there's something you've been ignoring or just not even cognizant of that comes, kind of crystal clear during that process. I think there's a huge amount of growth in listening to yourself and kind of believing in yourself. And sometimes it needs some help, sometimes it needs some external help, right? You can open doors to pursuits that you never gave yourself time for. So one of the things I've found in the past, and this doesn't really apply in this current situation, but I remember a situation it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, where I was in an organisation where I'd been doing work in a very similar space for probably about 5 years. And I was kind of coming to the end of an assignment and I didn't know what was next, and I'd sort of lost a sense of future and there was some anxiety around that. And actually, creative stuff really got me through that. I started screen printing and making candles and just doodling and that kind of thing, And I hadn't done that for years. In fact, I'd never made a candle in my life, and I hadn't done screen printing since I was 12 years old or something, But it just that creative outlet, and there's a mindfulness that comes with that as well, because obviously you're focused on the thing that you're doing and not on everything else. I think it can really shed a light on a different part of yourself that you've sort of let go to the wayside. So I love the growth that comes from inserting creativity, unusual and unexpected creativity into your life at a time when, everything feels a little bit wonky.
What advice would you give to your 10-year-old self, kind of knowing what you know now and looking at the journey that you've been on, the impact that you've made, the lives that you've changed? What advice would you give to your 10-year-old self on the handling failures and setbacks that are on your path, looking back, but also kind of looking ahead into the future?
10-year-old me is really, really important to me. That's the person who had a really huge realization about his own identity and didn't know what to do with that. And part of that was because he didn't have the language or the confidence or the knowledge to talk about what he needed or who he was. And there was external factors, presenting barriers to that as well. Part of it was because I came from that family environment where there wasn't a lot of money, but there was a lot of encouragement to do better and do more and get the best grades and be the best at sports and all of that stuff. So there was this unintended sense of perfection that was required. And so I think that 10-year-old Gareth didn't really have the permission to lean into the negative emotions around change and setbacks and really feel them. And I also don't think that he had the permission or the understanding that not everything has to be perfect, and sometimes things aren't okay, and sometimes things don't work out. So I think the advice I would give to him is similar to advice that I would give to anybody now, which is live it, feel it, lean into it, recognize that not everything's going to go your way and things are going to be hard, and that's all part of the universe's plan for life. And find the tribe of people that enables you to be true to yourself, or to be your true self. You know, I think for a long time, you know, my need to fit in, you know, my need to pass, let's say, kind of got in the way of me really engaging with people that actually would have helped me move through that journey much more quickly. That went a bit deeper than I expected it to, Antonio.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a safe space, and thank you for the vulnerability, and know that you are not alone. I think many of us share more of these experiences than we think we do, and it's just, yeah, how do we move to a place where we can openly discuss and talk about these things so other people have an easier time, you know, coming into themselves and becoming and making this world a better place than what it currently is.
Yeah.
And I love what you said. It's feeling it, leaning into it, and yeah, embracing that experience fully, recognizing that going through that is how you get to the other side of whatever is meant for you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gareth. Some rapid fire questions for you. And yeah, before we wrap up, and I love this part of the show because it just gives us a better opportunity to get behind the veil to, you know, further understand who it is that we're speaking to. So the first one, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
So just before I moved into diversity, equity and inclusion, somebody said to me, your challenge in this work is not to be an activist, it's to be an advocate for everybody. And as I've been doing the work over the years, that's come back to me so many times. Because as a practitioner, and especially as a member of the queer community, there's a real pull and a real temptation to dive into activism. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have traits of activism in the work, but you can't go full on activism because that takes you away from being a professional and a practitioner. That was some of the best advice I ever had.
I love that. How do you define success personally?
Success equals happiness. Simple as that.
Say that again.
For those who didn't hear that, success equals happiness. That's all it's about. Happiness and balance.
That's such a good definition. I'm adding a list of sticky notes on my wall from like things people say in all these episodes, and that one's going up there as well. What book has had the biggest impact on your life to date or so far? It could be something that you've recently read in your transition to, you know, really building this platform and business.
Actually, not that recent, and I'm going to give you two, actually, if that's okay. So one is a book called The Power of Moments, and it's by two brothers called Chip and Dan Heath. And I read it during the days when I was working in the employee recognition space, and it really helped me think strategically about that work. But more so on a human level, it really helped me to see life as a series of moments to be created. I suppose it comes back to that conversation about agency and control, right? But actually, creating moments for yourself and creating moments for others, rather than just letting things go past kind of naturally. It's such a great book, honestly. The other one is from more of an introspective point of view, and it's a book called The Velvet Rage. And the name of the author escapes me, unfortunately, which is terrible. It's a book about the experience of being a gay man and the stages of growth as you work through that journey. And it taught me so much about myself that I really needed, and I didn't know that I needed. Highly recommend both of those books.
What's one habit that has significantly improved your life?
Probably journaling, if I'm honest. Now, we talked about that before. I think that's the one thing that is really a practice. I'm trying to think if there's another one. Probably exercise. And, so as I mentioned before, like, I was a really sporty kid, but to excess. I was a competitive swimmer. I trained 5 times a week. By the age of 16, it got too much for me. And I wanted to live a different life, and, won't go into too many details on that. But, so sport and exercise really disappeared for a long time. And I think in the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've had some realization about myself, which is how exercise works for me. And that is do it with a trainer, because you're not going to do it on your own. But finding that out about myself and then using that as a means of, maintaining physical fitness, but also some kind of challenge as well. Having the accountability and the push from the other person. You could do that with a gym buddy or an exercise buddy. You don't have to pay for a personal trainer, but I think just that the habit of doing exercise with someone else who's going to hold you accountable for progress, that's also been pretty life-changing.
I love that. And 100% behind that as well. Who has been your biggest inspiration throughout your journey so far?
So my gut response to that question is Prince. Believe it or not.
That's a good one.
I mean, dude, that Prince was such a force in terms of, knowing yourself, unapologetically being that person, subverting what's classed as normal. The music obviously speaks for itself as well, and I'm a huge fan of his music. But yeah, he's the first person that came into my mind. There's another person that I should shout out, which is a lady by the name of Laurie George. She was one of my bosses during my time with the Coca-Cola company. And an incredible human, a woman of very deep faith, but never imposed that on anyone else. A woman who always had grace and compassion for others, but also didn't take any bullshit. And thankfully continues to be in my life and is a great sounding board and a great advocate for me, but also a real inspiration. Yeah, she's wonderful.
What are you hoping that the universe will deliver to you in this next year, in this next phase of your journey as you continue to move forward?
Buyer for my house. That's a big one. That kind of feels a bit like a missing piece of the jigsaw, honestly, at the moment. So that would be a big one. And I'm manifesting that from a place of calm and positivity. I would say, secondly, for my, very sort of panacea plan for my career to come into fruition. This portfolio of stuff where nothing's full time and nothing's too pressured and everything's values driven and principles led and all of that stuff. I would really, really, really like that to come true. And I'm taking agency in that, of course, but I know that it's not all on me. And so, yeah, I'm hoping the universe will bring that to fruition as well.
Amazing. And I'm manifesting all of that for you as well, sending all the good vibes and positive energy your way. Gareth, for folks that are interested in learning more about you, learning more about your experience, learning more about your services, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
So professionally, I am relatively active on LinkedIn. I'm not going to say I'm prolific, but I'm relatively active. So you can find me just at Gareth Whalley on LinkedIn. If you're interested in learning more about the business, Big Bang People Solutions, you can go to bigbangpeople.com. And that you'll find all about the business and about me and the services that I offer there. I'm not going to shout out my Instagram handle because I'm a terrible Instagrammer. There's no point. I haven't got the perseverance. So yeah, keep it to LinkedIn, and then we can take it from there if it feels like going to Instagram or elsewhere.
Amazing. And any parting words for our guests? Last piece of advice. Again, as we all continue to move through uncertain times globally, any parting words or a bit of advice?
I would just say have faith and trust in both yourself and the universe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gareth, for being here with us today. And thank you to everyone that took the time to tune in, whether it was from your car, on your walk, or sitting on the couch behind your desk. Please do continue to take very good care of yourselves, and I will see you next month.
Thanks, Antonio.